Here's a reminder of the latest empty promise the Labour government made about Britain's borders.
I can confirm today that, led by the work of my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, we will be ending the costly use of hotels to house asylum seekers in this Parliament.
Well, for those of you who were sceptical when you first heard that from the Labour government, you are not alone. David Bolt, the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, has said that this prospect is now unrealistic. And I would say that is putting it mildly. For a moment, let's recall the numbers. So far this year, contrary to what Keir Starmer promised the country, nearly 18,500 illegal migrants have crossed the channel in the small boats. That is a 50% increase on the same point in 2022, the record year that we have so far. It means, in other words, that we're on track for another record year of channel crossings into this country, crossings that make an absolute mockery of our claim to be a self-governing sovereign nation. And there's a reason why the numbers are so bad. The Labour Party simply does not care about this issue. The party is filled with open borders fanatics, and if you don't believe me, just look at their policies. Labour's plan for the small boats was summarised by this.
To go after the criminal gangs, to smash the gang networks.
To smash the smuggling gangs.
Smash the gangs.
To smash the gangs.
Well, smash the gangs has failed. Even the UK border chief said so this morning in the newspapers, that we are not going to solve this crisis by smashing the gangs. But Labour's plan was also this.
We also need to clear the ridiculous backlog.
We'll cut the asylum backlog.
Bringing down the backlog of asylum claims. We've got to find accommodation. There's a record backlog.
But processing that backlog means granting nearly everybody asylum who crosses the channel, and that indeed creates more incentives for more people to cross the channel. Labour has incentivised people to make this perilous journey. They've incentivised people smugglers to go into the business of trafficking illegal migrants into our country. Here's why it matters, though. We now know...
Just Eat, Uber, Deliveroo, all couriers.
Indeed, many of the people who are coming over in the small boats are now working in the UK economy illegally. And we also know, thanks to Baroness Casey's review, unfortunately, that some of the migrants crossing the channel are among current rape gang suspects, not to mention those Iranian terrorists who crossed in the small boats, allegedly on their way to blow up Israel's embassy. Well, perhaps it's no surprise that new polling released today reveals that the majority of women in our capital city in London say they do not feel safe on London's streets. The channel crisis has become a matter of national security. Is it just me who finds it absolutely absurd that Keir Starmer talks about defending our country while running an open border policy? What is Labour's plan? There isn't one. As ever, let me know your views tonight, gbnews.com/yoursay. Of course, you can reach us on X at gbnews. Well, I'm joined now by the human rights lawyer, Shoaib Khan. Shoaib, we've debated this before. How do we solve this crisis? And please don't say more legal and safe routes, because that's not going to solve it. How do we solve this crisis for the British people?
I mean, well, a few ways of doing it. Depends what you mean by the crisis. But obviously, what we're talking about is stopping the boats or stopping illegal immigration. Then, of course,
let's stop the boats. Let's start with stopping the boats. How do we stop the boats?
So obviously, like you said, I mean, and obviously you knew that's the answer. That's why you said don't mention it. But yeah, of course, we need to create safe legal routes. Obviously, you know, after the Taliban took over Afghanistan, why weren't there, you know, hundreds, thousands of Afghans on the boats? Because we actually sent flights. Obviously, I think it was just about 2 flights or something, you know, woefully low number. But we sent flights. How come we didn't have Ukrainians coming over? Because we sent flights over. So, of course, we have done these things, and that's what we need to do. Obviously, we're so busy, you know, us and our allies, we create refugees, we invade countries, we bomb countries. Of course, those people need to go somewhere. And that's the only way they come here, because there's no legal route. If what we're saying is, how do we find a way to empty the hotels? Then, of course, there's lots of ways of doing that. The point is, I don't live in a hotel. You don't.
I've got an idea. I've got a great idea. Shoaib, I've got a great idea. Here's how we stop the hotels. Anybody who arrives in the UK illegally on the small boats or the back of a lorry is immediately detained and deported to an offshore processing centre. Don't care where it is, but they are detained and they are immediately deported rather than us subject the British people to the absurdity of having them fund accommodation for people who are breaking our laws.
It depends what you mean, but if you mean processing, depends how long it's going to take. Processing takes years, so basically we're going to send them somewhere. I mean, obviously, was it Priti Patel who suggested, I think, a volcanic island a few thousand miles away? So if that's what we're talking about, that's, we know that's rubbish, that's illegal, that's inhumane. So yeah, of course I'm not going to. So it depends where we're sending them and how long. Why don't we just speed up the process so asylum claims don't take years and years? Why don't we actually have a way? We all know that.
So you say, why don't asylum claims take years and years? The issue we have at the moment is the Labour government is approving the vast majority of asylum claims that are made in this country, including by illegal migrants who are breaking our laws, arriving on the small boats. I think they're approving somewhere between 60 and 70%. So the big message that is sending to people around the world is if you get into a dinghy and you cross the channel and you break the law and you arrive in the UK illegally, the government, on balance, will probably let you stay. And as we've discovered in the papers this week, you can probably get a job for a fast food delivery company almost immediately. How on earth is this putting the security and the safety and the interests of the British people first?
Yeah, well, it's not putting the safety first, and that's the whole point. Because because people have to be smuggled in. We shouldn't have that. We should have safe legal routes as the first reason. Secondly, why are they having to work in the black economy? Why don't we just allow them to work? And that's the thing. I mean, why am I having to support asylum seekers in hotels?
Why are we allowing illegal migrants to work in our UK economy? This is completely bonkers. They've broken the law. We don't allow them to work in our economy. That provides an incentive for more people to come. If you break our law, there should be consequences. Thank you to Shoaib Khan. I'm joined now by former government lawyer Amar Jahal. Amar, I feel like I'm going insane in this debate. What is happening? How do we create a system that actually treats British taxpayers, the law-abiding, hard-working majority, with respect? How can we create a system here that treats the people out there with the decency that they deserve?
Well, that would be a fairly long and difficult question to answer, Matt. But I think, as you correctly pointed out in response to Shoaib, you've got to start with robust deterrence. And he was talking about safe and legal routes and cited Afghanistan and Ukraine as examples. In fact, Afghanistan has been in parallel. The safe and legal routes that we've created has been in parallel to a lot of Afghan nationals arriving on small boats. That, in fact, it didn't prevent boats. Boat arrivals have been happening roughly since 2018, although there's been a significant uptick in recent years. OK, so let's say this bigger issue, we've now got the UK border chief saying it's unrealistic. We're not going to stop the asylum hotels this side of the general election. So the folks out there are going to have to be paying somewhere between £7 and £10 billion every year for the privilege of basically providing accommodation for people who have broken our laws and I would argue shouldn't be in our country to begin with. Where does the Labour government go on this? Because clearly they will be aware that the status quo is unsustainable. Presumably they're aware that the numbers are just spiralling out of control. I would hope somebody in number 10 is aware of the fact that there is no border policy, effectively. We are running open borders. Where does the government go on this issue of accommodation and housing? OK, so on the bigger picture of illegal migration, they're clearly in a bind. Not only do they have the meaningless slogan, which is similar to Stop the Boats, of smash the gangs, which has dug them a further hole, they're not prepared to make the fundamental changes to our international law obligations, so predominantly but not entirely the ECHR, and then domestic law following on from that. So within that constraint, they're in a pretty big bind.
OK, so forgive me, this is probably a bit outside of your immediate focus at work, but I wrote in May 2024, Labour's strategy for smashing the gangs was not going to make a blind bit of difference because if you remove the Rwanda plan, if you decriminalise illegal migration and you maintain this generous welfare state, including housing and accommodation, the numbers are going to spiral. And guess what? The numbers spiraled. We're now up to about 170,000. More people have arrived illegally in this country on the small boats than are in the British Army, right? Which should give everybody pause for thought. So given it was so obvious this strategy was going to fail, why on earth did nobody within number 10 and the Labour government actually realise this was not going to work?
I think Labour was pretty relentlessly focused on winning the election, and clearly in a whole range of areas they hadn't thought much past election night. And on to day one, they've realized that, well, everything won't just be better just because they think they're better people morally than the Conservatives. The civil servants hasn't run fantastically just because of a change of government, and equally sound bites on the borders haven't cut it. Now, in terms of the big picture, what they need to do, in addition to addressing deterrence, they also need to address the pull factors, which, as you've mentioned, very generous.
Well, smartphone, cash card, accommodation, NHS, schooling. You know, I mean, we are, as a French say, we're a soft touch. Let me put it to you that the answer to this riddle is we leave the European Convention on Human Rights, we reform the Human Rights Act, which entrenches the ECHR into domestic law, we immediately detain and deport, we process asylum seekers and illegal migrants offshore, outside of the UK. We do not put them into the heart of British communities, around British people and their children. And we get rid of this soft touch welfare regime, which is incentivizing people to come. Now, when I lay out that strategy, I think most people out there would say, that's pretty reasonable. Let's do that. When I lay that strategy out to anybody within the Labour government, they say, oh, well, you know, we can possibly do that. But actually, we have the complete ability to do that.
Yeah, so there's absolutely no way to do this whilst keeping the establishment, the Guardian, people who have profited from the human rights industry on the side. So you have to park the moral outrage and the hows that will come. And in addition to those four fantastic points, the fifth pillar is going to have to be reforming domestic law, because in addition
reforming
to...
the Blairite legacy is
Blairite legacy, but it's not just the Human Rights Act, because there are endless appeals. You're talking about an uptick in Home Office decisions. If the decision isn't in favour of granting someone protected or refugee status, they appeal. The longer their appeal is in the system, the longer the chance they have of having an Article 8 right under the European Convention of Human Rights to stay based on their private life or their family life. So it's all enmeshed. It's all become very complicated, and we need to move back to a simpler, easier immigration system.
We need a factory reset in this country that broadly takes our judicial legal system somewhat back to where it was in the late 1990s, where we could actually control our borders, who is coming in and who is going out. Thank you to Amar, as always, a friend of the channel, friend of the show.